name is Kevin Holbrook. This is one of our Lunch and Learn sessions. Today's topic is the Upgrade Assistant. The Upgrade Assistant was added in 2016 as part of the Task Scheduler. And I think this really fills a hole in part of the software that was kind of left up to the imagination, as I'll call it here. You will have to have 2016 to be able to do this, but we're going to talk about how we use the Upgrade Assistant and what issue it fixes here in just a second. And then we're going to talk about, if you're using the PDM Professional products, what you can do to also use the Upgrade Assistant, because it isn't necessarily integrated, as you'll see here in a moment. So the issue is important because the problem causes you speed and performance issues. On top of the idea that if you do open a file and there is an issue, how nice would it have been to understand that there is an issue and maybe get it fixed ahead of time, especially if it's a critical file. So that brings us to the Upgrade Assistant. So this was included in the 2016 Task Scheduler. What's nice about this tool is it does not modify the file in any way. What it will do is it will open the file in the old version of SOLIDWORKS you were using and the newest version of SOLIDWORKS and do a comparison between the two. Now, as of right now, it only supports old versions of SOLIDWORKS back to 2013. So if you're migrating from 13, 14, 15, all the way to 16, we can do comparison between those versions and what the file is like between those versions. Couple of rules that make it a little bit harder to run this on the PDM side is that you must have write access to the file, but I come up with a workflow to help you with that, and we can maybe do something with that going forward. Now, what does it check for? Well, it checks for changes in performance. Okay, so if in 2013 it took 2 minutes to open a file, and in 2016 it takes 7 minutes, okay, it's going to flag for that. It will also show you if there's been performance enhancements. So you might be able to see, hey, it's worthwhile getting these things upgraded. It will tell you if there's any rebuild errors. And then this one I think is awesome, drawing pixel changes. So it actually uses the tools in SOLIDWORKS to compare one drawing to the other, and it will note any color and position changes to any of the geometry on that drawing. Now, those of you who are online, if you've ever opened a drawing and a dimension is bounced out of the way or something is moved and you didn't really understand it, this will potentially flag for that, so you understand that there may be an issue with this drawing when I open it in 2016. And then any stability problems. Maybe you've got a corrupt file, something's happened along the way that causes the file to just break down and close SOLIDWORKS. It will flag for that as well. So let's take a look at how this thing works. I mean, it's kind of hard on a webinar to show this thing running on any substantial file set. But you'll get the premise, and we'll look at some of the result files. So if we go to our SOLIDWORKS installation, in my case SOLIDWORKS 2016 under Tools, you're going to find your Task Scheduler for 2016. Now in there are all the same tasks that we had previous, but a new task called the Upgrade Assistant. Okay. Now, just to note in here, and I think this is important to remember, that this is more of a exploratory tool. It does not do any modification to the file. It does it all in temp directories, and the way that it works is phenomenal. So it even notes here the files will not be modified. Now that's very different than the convert files or the file upgrade utility that's part of PDM. Those will actually convert the files to 2016. This is going to allow you to see if there will be any issues if you convert them. Okay, so First thing I do is give the task a title. I tell it what earlier version of SolidWorks I want to test it between. So I'm going to have it open up the files in 15 SP4 and compare them to 16 SP2, which is the latest version I have on my machine. Now, you'll also notice here that I can add individual files or folders, and it can include subfolders. So I have just on my desktop a folder with 4 or 5 files in it. Now, how often am I running this? Am I running it once a week, daily? For this type of task, once is plenty enough. We give it a start time. I'm going to make this 12:12. I might want to give myself a few minutes here. Let's go 12/13/57 and the date. Now, a couple other things that are options for us here. If I hit the options button, this has to do with configurations. Because as we're kind of telling the software, we want to compare if there's any changes. Do you want it to check all configurations? So what it's going to do is load each configuration, look at the body information, make sure there's no problems with any of the configs, or only check the active configuration. Now this one here is going to add considerable more time because it's going to load all that information in. Now you tell it where you want it to save the log files when we're done. Okay, and then the last thing we have is under the advanced button here is where it's using or creating the working folder. Now it's going to be taking these files and making copies and doing a compare and saving out text files and doing all this stuff in the back end. We've got to give it kind of a spot to work here. We can tell it when to time out, so if there's an issue with a particular file being open, if it waits so long, it will stop and move on to the next one. Okay, and then all we have to do is hit finish. Okay, now you can see the time that the task is scheduled. Once we get closer to that time, it's 12:12 right now. The system will pick up on that and it will start to launch the task in the create subtasks. Now I have one in here from earlier just to give you an idea of what this thing looks like. So this particular task that I did earlier had 34 tasks essentially, or subtasks to this. So that just means there was actually 17 files in this folder, and it had to open 17 files in one release and then 17 files in another release. Now you can see here, it's the way it breaks down the tasks here is it says step 1 and it names each part. That's essentially opening up in the older version, and then step 2 is opening it up in the newer version. Okay, now you'll see we talked long enough that my task is now kicking off. It's going to run live, and you'll notice the 2015 interface has the colors still there for most of you who do not like the white, but it's now going to work its way through each of these different files. And let me take you to my current task here. If I refresh the task, you can see there's only a few files in here. There's like 5. So the software is working through them one by one. Step 1 is opening in the old. Step 2 is opening in the new. Okay? And again, it's not modifying the files. It's just trying to get an understanding of if I can expect an issue if I were to move forward. Now, if you're looking at this screen, you may have to hit refresh to see how far it's gotten. You can see I'm through the step 1 here. And it may take a second for 2016 to kick off and start the next step here. Now, once this is done, which will only take a few moments, the real magic is in what we get out the other end. Now, it's nice to be able to see in a graphical format what the results happen to be. And that's what we're going to get. We're going to get an HTML report. We're going to get a zip file that can be archived where I desire, which is the path that I set here for the Upgrade Assistant. And it's going to basically compile all of its test data in one area for me to continue working. Okay? So if we look at this, how do we get to the log for this? Now I just converted 5 files or checked the conversion on 5 files. If I select where it says completed subtask generated, it's going to ask me if I want to create a zip archive for the task. Now if I say yes to this, okay, the software creates a zip file in the folder that I desire. Now that's the path that we originally entered when we created the task. Mine happens to be on my desktop, contains the PowerPoint for today's presentation, but you can see the name of the task, the date and time that we kicked it off, and the size of the resulting file that's in there. Now we're going to come back to that in just a second and take a look at what's in there. So here's an example of a report. Now I have to say I ran this on many folders and very old files and found a few errors, but not a whole lot. So it was a little bit hard to find files that are issues, as they are few and far between. But here's an example. You know, the task, what versions of SOLIDWORKS, date and time it started, if it completed it. And then if we scroll down a little further, it gives me a summary of how many files had errors reported, how many had differences reported, and green is just completed. Now going even further, I can go down to the file names. If I expand the file name, I get even more information regarding this particular file. So I can see the date it was completed, start and finish time. I can see the file size as it existed in 2015 SP4 and the file size difference in 2016. And I'll be honest, of all these I've ran, only less than 10% have increased in file size. A majority of those are decrease in file size of anywhere between 0.5% to 10% decrease, and that's even from 15 on. So we do have some good information here. Below that is configurations. It understands if there's any difference in the number of configurations that was created, maybe from a design table or so on. That's in here. And then the rebuild time. I've seen some that take much more than 1 second to rebuild in 15, and the rebuild time has a % change to it. So I get a lot of information out of this. You can see there's 1% change on that part. There's a 0.5%. They're all pretty quick rebuild times. Okay. Here's a small increase in file rebuild times, but we had almost a full percentage decrease in file size. So something's different there. Then we take a look at the part, very similar. Okay. So here's an example of the data that we get out of it. Let me go to the zip folder here. I want to take you through and just show you what's in the folder. Now, it basically just organizes all the data into a zip file. It's multi-folders deep. As you can see here, the task scheduler report, the one that was just viewing, is also located in there. If I look at going a little bit further, I can get all the way down to a folder that contains XML files. Now, I'm going to take these out to my desktop to be able to view these, but this will help us understand what's actually going on here from a testing perspective. Now, I'm just going to take the XML and open it with WordPad. And the only reason I open this, it's not really formatted. I probably use an XML editor in this case, but I want you to get an idea of all the different things that they're checking when they open these files. So, I mean, you can see listed in there, is there a feature suppressed or unsuppressed? Is the depth the same? Is the feature type the same? Is the feature name the same? So it's not just looking for the basics, lights, scenes, cameras. It's looking at a lot of different things and reporting on it and comparing the two bits of data between the two softwares. So there's a lot here. Now, I do have one that had some errors, just so you can see what it might look like if there were errors. Okay, let me get down to it here. So here's an example This is an old mold that I had on my system, so I knew there was a lot of surfacing, a lot of sweeps and loss, stuff that maybe is a little more prone to having issues going forward. So you can see here that I didn't have any errors in the parts, but what I did have is some differences reported between the files. Now, if I click through the details, it actually tells me here what features had the rebuild error, and where I would have a sketch reference or a sketch relation that was perfectly fine in 2015. This tells me that the file has an issue in 2016. So there's clearly 3 files in this particular section that have a difference. And you can see even some of the rebuild times on these 3 files are a little bit different. Now, if anything in here is overly traumatizing and changes, I mean, you go from 10 seconds to 10 minutes to open a file, obviously that's a huge flag. It is also a flag that there's a rebuild error, although you could probably fix those pretty quickly. If you find something significant that could really hinder you, this is essentially all the data we would need to submit to SOLIDWORKS to figure out what in the code is causing the issue. What is the change? So not only is it a diagnostic, but it kind of allows you to go a little bit further and understand how we can fix it moving forward. All right, so task letter, pretty cut and dry as far as running this. And I would suggest if you're making the jump, you're going to run the convert tool or the file upgrade version utility, that you run this first. Check it out and see what you can do. Now, the last thing I wanted to close with, it's kind of a short topic today, is how do we do this in PDM? PDM's a little different. One of the requirements of the files that you're going to put in here is that they must be available for write access. Now, I'm going to illustrate this in an existing vault that I have in PDM Professional. I want you to notice I'm on the version tab of PDM, and if I click on any file, it says I have no local files. A quick way to show that is if I just go offline. For those of you who are not PDM users, I apologize. This will get a little in-depth real quick here. If I go offline, what's nice about this view is I can physically see which files I have local to my machine. You can see as I get into the offline folders, there's nothing. Well, obviously I can't set up a task on nothing. So what I have to do is I'll go work online. Okay, I'll go to my vault. The first thing I'm going to do is grab all the folders that I want to run this utility on, and I'm going to get the latest version of the file. Okay, what that's going to do is bring it local to this machine. Now, I would suggest that if you're doing this testing, you're doing this on an isolated machine that other computers can't access. Now what happens is when I go offline, I will actually physically see the files that were just moved to my local machine from the server. Okay, so if we go in here, I go to a folder, you can see they're in there, but you'll notice that one of my things that we required was that the file must be writable. And you can see because it's tied to PDM, I cannot write to this file, therefore I can't run the task scheduler utility. So what I could do, because I'm only using this for testing and understanding, is I could go to the files and turn off the read-only flag. Now, one of the things that PDM does for you here is you can't select multiple files and go to the properties and turn off the read-only flag. So if you're trying to do this for multiple folders in the entire vault, this is not a useful way to do this. So here's the workflow that I came up with. So what I would do, and like I said, this can be a remote computer that I would run this on. I would go right to my C drive where my local view is created, and I would delete the file vault view. Now, when you delete the file vault view, I can tell it to leave the contents of the vault view on this machine. So I'm leaving the folders behind. Now, essentially, this turns this into a folder, PDM Pro folder, and regular Windows folders below it. Now I can come in here and set the properties of all of the files to read-only or write access to those files underneath. Okay, so this will allow me to, this will allow me to set that access. Now I can set up the task scheduler and add that folder. It's a little bit of a workaround because there is no integration, but I think there's enough benefit to this tool in running it with the professional PDM that you can maybe grab some folders or a bunch of projects that are very current and you're worried about upgrading and be able to run the Upgrade Assistant to at least get an idea. Once you're done running that and you get the reports, those files can be deleted off this machine. They're not going to affect what's in the vault. You're disconnected from the vault. So there's very little risk other than needing to have the folder space on that machine to be able to do that. So I appreciate your time today. I hope that going forward as you upgrade releases, you understand how important it is to get those files to the latest release. And this tool will allow you to understand if you're going to run into issues. You run this early on, we've got a great idea of where we might have problems upgrading files. If we don't do this, you're going to run into them when you open up the files the next time. And when you do that, all along the way, you're going to have speed decrease because you're opening and converting files along the way. So I do recommend looking into the opportunities to get your files upgraded. There are a bunch of utilities. One, convert in Task Scheduler, the file version upgrade utility, and there's even one for Workgroup as well. So contact CAD Dimensions or check out your help files for getting started on those. So that's all I had for today. If there's any questions, please post them in the questions section. Otherwise, I hope you stop in for the next Lunch and Learn. Talk to you soon.
Don't forget to check us out on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and our blog for more great content by clicking on the links in the description below.